The billionaire pointed at him and laughed. You, a washed-up single dad, trying to talk to my son. Her friends joined in, mocking. But when the single father finally spoke up, the entire restaurant went silent. What happened next didn't just humiliate her, it destroyed her reputation forever. Would you stay silent if speaking up could cost your job, but restore someone's dignity? Imagine losing everything in one moment, yet gaining the world. That night at Golden Palm, Daniel had to choose. And his choice changed everything. Daniel had learned to ignore the looks. The ones that said he didn't belong. The ones that measured him by his worn black shoes and the faint coffee stain on his collar that never quite washed out. He moved through the Golden Palm restaurant like a shadow. Tray balanced on one hand, eyes down, shoulders tight. It was safer that way. The restaurant smelled like money. Leather booth seats, polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers that caught the light and scattered it across white tablecloths like broken glass. Daniel had worked here for 3 years, and he still felt like an intruder every time he pushed through the kitchen doors. He wiped down table 7 and checked his watch. 6:42 in the evening, Emma's medication was due at 8. He'd already called Mrs. Brennan next door twice to remind her. Emma was 7 years old, small for her age, with a heart that struggled to keep pace with the life she wanted to live. The doctors had used words like congenital and defect and surgical fix. Daniel had heard expensive. The envelope was still in his locker. He'd found it taped to his apartment door that morning. Eviction notice, 30 days. He was already 2 months behind on rent and the hospital bills kept coming. Every shift he worked bought him another week, another day, another hour with his daughter. Daniel. He turned. Marcus, the floor manager, stood by the host stand with his arms crossed. His expression was the same one he always wore when he had to deliver bad news, but wanted to make it sound like opportunity. You're on table 12 tonight, Marcus said. Daniel glanced toward the corner booth. Table 12? The one they saved for VIPs. The one that tipped well if you didn't screw up and got you fired if you did. Who is it? Daniel asked. Marcus leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Victoria Hartwell. The name landed like a stone in cold water. Everyone in the city knew Victoria Hartwell. Real estate empire. Charity galas, magazine covers. She was the kind of woman who could ruin someone with a phone call and never think about it again. She requested our best service, Marcus continued. Don't mess this up. Daniel nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. His throat felt tight. He thought about the eviction notice, about Emma's prescription refill that was due next week, about the $12.37 in his checking account. He couldn't afford to mess this up. But what if messing up was the only way to do what's right? At 7:15, the front doors opened and Victoria Hartwell walked in like she owned the building. Maybe she did. Daniel wouldn't have been surprised. She wore a tailored black dress that probably cost more than his rent. Her heels clicked against the marble with the kind of confidence that came from never having to ask for anything twice. Behind her, 3 women followed, all dressed in similar shades of wealth and indifference. Daniel straightened his tie and approached the table. He kept his face neutral, professional, invisible. Good evening, he said. Welcome to the Golden Palm. Victoria didn't look at him. She was already scanning the wine list, one manicured finger tracing down the page. Her friends settled into their seats, laughing about something Daniel didn't catch. He stood there, hands folded, waiting. We'll start with the Chateau Margaux, Victoria said, still not looking up. 2003. Daniel wrote it down. The bottle cost $850. He checked the wine list once out of curiosity and never looked again. Of course, he said. I'll bring that right out. He turned to leave, but then the door opened again. A young man stepped inside, hesitant, like he wasn't sure he was in the right place. He looked about 19 or 20, thin with dark hair that fell across his forehead. He wore a jacket that didn't quite fit and kept his eyes on the floor as he walked. Victoria glanced up and her expression shifted. Something cold and sharp moved behind her eyes. Ethan, she called out, her voice carried across the restaurant. Sit down. The young man, Ethan, walked toward the table. He didn't say anything, didn't meet anyone's gaze. He slid into the seat at the far end of the booth, as far from his mother as the table allowed. Daniel noticed the way Ethan's hands moved. Small gestures, fingers tapping against his leg, the way his eyes flickered toward people's mouths when they spoke. Daniel had seen that before. Recognition settled in his chest like an old ache. He approached the table with the wine, poured it carefully, and set the bottle down. Victoria and her friends resumed their conversation, voices loud and careless. Ethan sat in silence, staring at the menu like he was trying to disappear into it. Daniel cleared his throat softly and stepped closer to Ethan's side of the table. He kept his movements slow, deliberate. When Ethan finally looked up, Daniel met his eyes and spoke slowly, enunciating each word. What would you like to order? Ethan's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or relief. He glanced at his mother, then back at Daniel. His hands lifted slightly, forming shapes in the air. But then he stopped. His fingers curled into fists. He pointed at something on the menu instead. Daniel nodded. The salmon. Good choice. Ethan's shoulders relaxed. Just a fraction. Victoria's voice cut through the moment like a blade. What are you doing? Daniel looked up. Victoria was staring at him, her face twisted into something between disbelief and disgust. Her friends had stopped talking. The whole table had gone silent. I was taking his order, Daniel said carefully. Victoria laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. It was sharp and performative, designed to be heard. Her friends joined in a chorus of mockery that spread across the table like spilled wine. A poor waiter thinks he can talk to my son, Victoria said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. She looked at her friends, shaking her head. Can you believe this? Daniel's jaw tightened. He felt the heat rising in his chest, crawling up his neck. He wanted to say something. Wanted to tell her that her son deserved to be spoken to like a human being. That treating him like he was invisible was worse than any disability. But he didn't. He couldn't. He thought about Emma, about the eviction notice, about the $12 in his account. He lowered his eyes and stepped back. My apologies, he said quietly. I'll bring your meals out shortly. He turned and walked toward the kitchen, every step feeling heavier than the last. Behind him, the laughter continued. He didn't look back. He didn't let himself. But as he pushed through the kitchen doors, he caught one last glimpse of Ethan. The young man was staring down at the table, his face red, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Daniel knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror more times than he could count. It was the look of someone who'd been made to feel small for far too long. How much longer could he stay silent? Daniel stood in the kitchen with his back against the cold steel counter, breathing through his nose. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his apron and counted to 10. Then 20. The laughter from table 12 still echoed in his head, sharp and cutting. The cook, a broad-shouldered man named Ree, glanced over from the grill. You good? Ree asked. Daniel nodded without looking up. He wasn't good. But he couldn't afford not to be. He loaded the tray with their meals. Salmon for Ethan, filet mignon for Victoria, sea bass, and lamb chops for the others. The plates were arranged with the kind of precision that cost $60 per entree. Daniel lifted the tray and pushed back through the doors. The dining room felt different now, heavier. He could feel eyes on him as he walked. Other servers, other guests. Everyone had heard Victoria's laughter. Everyone knew what had happened. He approached table 12 and set the plates down one by one, starting with Victoria. She didn't acknowledge him. She was too busy talking about a property acquisition in the Marina District, her voice loud and confident. Her friends nodded along, sipping their wine. Daniel moved to Ethan's side of the table and placed the salmon in front of him. The young man looked up briefly and Daniel saw something flicker in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or sadness. It was hard to tell. Daniel stepped back and folded his hands. Is there anything else I can get for you? Victoria waved him off without looking. We're fine. He turned to leave, but then he heard it, a quiet sound, almost a whisper. He glanced back and saw Ethan's lips moving, forming words that didn't quite make it into the air. The young man was staring at his plate, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Victoria noticed, too, her expression darkened. Ethan, she said sharply. Sit up straight. Ethan didn't move. His shoulders were hunched forward, his head low. He looked like he wanted to fold into himself and disappear. One of Victoria's friends leaned in, smiling in that false sweet way that rich people did when they wanted to seem kind. Is he okay? Victoria laughed again, but this time it was different. Bitter, tired. He's fine, she said. He just doesn't know how to behave in public. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. He told himself to walk away. Told himself it wasn't his business. Told himself that getting involved would cost him everything. But then Ethan looked up and Daniel saw the boy's eyes glistening, wet, ashamed. Daniel thought about Emma, about the way she looked at him when she was in pain and trying to hide it, about the way she smiled even when the doctor said things that made Daniel want to scream. He thought about the eviction notice, about the $12 in his account, about the fact that he was one mistake away from losing everything. And then he thought about the fact that none of that mattered if he couldn't look his daughter in the eye anymore. Daniel stepped forward. His voice came out steady, calm, and clear. Excuse me. Victoria looked up, irritation flashing across her face. What now? Daniel met her gaze. He didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Your son tried to tell you something, Daniel said. Maybe you should listen. The table went silent. Victoria's friend stared at him like he just set the tablecloth on fire. The other diners nearby stopped eating, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Victoria's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief, then to something colder, sharper. I'm sorry, she said slowly, her voice dripping with condescension. Did you just tell me how to speak to my son? Daniel's heart was pounding, but he kept his voice even. I'm saying maybe he deserves to be heard. Victoria stood up, her chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden quiet. She was taller than Daniel had expected. She looked down at him like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. You have no idea who you're talking to, she said. Daniel didn't move. I know exactly who I'm talking to. The words hung in the air between them. Sharp. Dangerous. One of Victoria's friends gasped. Another reached for her phone. Daniel could see the woman angling it toward them, the screen glowing. Victoria's face flushed red. She took a step closer, her voice low and venomous. You're a waiter, she hissed. A nobody? You think you can stand here and lecture me about my son? Daniel felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. He forced himself to breathe, forced himself to stay calm. I think, he said quietly, that you're so busy being powerful that you forgot what it's like to be kind. The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen noise seemed to have stopped. Everyone was watching, waiting. Victoria's laugh was cold and sharp. She turned to her friends, gesturing at Daniel like he was a joke. Can you believe this? She said. A washed-up single dad who can barely keep a roof over his head thinks he can tell me how to raise my child. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. She knew. Somehow she knew about his situation. Maybe Marcus had told her. Maybe she just guessed. It didn't matter. You don't get to do this, Daniel said, his voice rising now. You don't get to humiliate your own son just because you can. Victoria stepped even closer, her eyes blazing. You're fired. Daniel felt the ground shift. Beneath him, the room tilted. He thought about Emma, about the hospital bills, about the eviction notice. But then he looked at Ethan, and the young man was staring at him with wide eyes, his mouth slightly open, shocked. Odd. Daniel turned back to Victoria. Then I'm fired. The silence that followed was suffocating. Victoria's smile was cruel. You'll never work in the city again. I'll make sure of it. Daniel didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. He'd burned the bridge. There was no going back now. But then something unexpected happened. Ethan stood up. The movement was sudden, jerky, like he'd been holding himself down for years, and finally let go. He looked at his mother, and for the first time that night, his face wasn't filled with shame. It was filled with anger. Stop, Ethan said. His voice was rough, uneven, the kind of voice that came from someone who wasn't used to using it, but it was loud enough, clear enough. Victoria turned to him, stunned. Ethan, sit down. Ethan shook his head. His hands were trembling, but he didn't sit. He looked at Daniel, then back at his mother. I'm deaf, Mom, he said. His words slow but deliberate. Not broken, the restaurant erupted. Not in laughter this time. In something else, a low murmur that spread across the room like wildfire. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered. Victoria's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Ethan turned toward Daniel. His eyes were wet, but he was smiling. A small, fragile smile. Then he walked past his mother, past the table, and headed for the door. Victoria grabbed her purse, her movement sharp and frantic. She looked at Daniel, her expression twisted with rage. You're done, she spat. You hear me? Done. She stormed out, her friend scrambling to follow. The door slammed behind them and the restaurant stayed silent for another long moment. Then someone started clapping. It was soft at first, hesitant. But then another person joined in and another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was applauding, the sound filling the space like a wave. Daniel stood there, frozen, the tray still in his hands. He didn't feel victorious. He felt numb, terrified. Marcus appeared at his side, his face grim. My office, Marcus said. Now. Daniel followed him through the kitchen, past the line cooks who were staring at him with a mix of awe and pity. Marcus's office was small and cramped, barely big enough for a desk and 2 chairs. Marcus closed the door and turned to face him. What the hell were you thinking? Marcus said. Daniel didn't have an answer. He stared at the floor, his mind racing. He thought about Emma, about how he was going to tell her that he'd lost his job, about how he was going to pay for her medication. You know who that was, right? Marcus continued. Victoria Hartwell. She owns half the restaurants in this city. She could destroy us with one phone call. Daniel looked up. She was humiliating her son. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. He looked exhausted. I know. I saw it, but that doesn't change anything. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. So, you're firing me? Marcus didn't answer right away. He just stared at Daniel, his expression unreadable. I don't have a choice, Marcus said finally. I'm sorry. Daniel nodded slowly. He'd known it was coming. He'd known it the moment he opened his mouth. Take your things and go, Marcus said quietly. I'll mail you your last check. Daniel stood and walked to the door. He didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. He went to his locker, grabbed his jacket, and walked out through the back exit. The night air was cold against his face. He stood there for a moment, staring up at the sky, trying to figure out how everything had fallen apart so fast. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Mrs. Brennan. Emma's asking for you. She's okay. Just missing her dad. Daniel closed his eyes. He felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. The job, the rent, the bills, the future that had just collapsed. But when he thought about Ethan's face, the way the young man had stood up and finally used his voice, Daniel felt something else, too. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd done the right thing, even if it cost him everything. What if one act of courage could change lives forever? Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, staring at the eviction notice on the dresser. Emma was asleep in the next room, her breathing soft and steady through the thin wall. He'd checked on her 3 times already. Each time he'd stood in her doorway and watched her chest rise and fall, reassuring himself that she was still okay, still here. By morning, his phone had 17 missed calls. He didn't recognize most of the numbers. He ignored them all and made Emma breakfast. Cereal with the last of the milk. She ate slowly, her small hands wrapped around the spoon, her eyes half closed with sleep. "You're home early?" Emma said. Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, got the morning off." She looked up at him, her expression curious. "Are you sad?" Daniel's throat tightened. He reached across the table and touched her hand. "No, sweetheart," he said. "I'm okay." She studied his face for a moment, then went back to her cereal. Daniel watched her eat and tried not to think about how many breakfasts they had left before the eviction took effect. 29 days, then 28, then nothing. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He silenced it and carried the dishes to the sink. Then Emma turned on the television. Daniel was washing the bowls when he heard it. A voice from the TV. Familiar, sharp. He turned and saw the screen filled with an image of the Golden Palm restaurant. Then the camera cut to a video, shaky, filmed on a phone. It was him. Daniel stood frozen, soap dripping from his hands as he watched himself on the screen. The video showed the moment he'd confronted Victoria. Every word, every gesture, the silence of the restaurant, Ethan standing up, the applause, the news anchor's voice cut through the footage. The video posted late last night has already been viewed over 2 million times. Many are calling it a powerful moment of standing up to privilege and defending those who can't defend themselves. Daniel's chest tightened. He grabbed the remote and turned off the TV. Emma looked up at him, confused. "Daddy, that was you?" Daniel knelt down beside her chair. "Yeah, it was." She tilted her head. "Why were you on TV?" Daniel didn't know how to answer that. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and tried to smile. "Just a thing that happened at work," he said. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. By noon, the video had been shared on every platform. Daniel made the mistake of opening his laptop. The clip was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Each platform had its own version, its own caption, its own angle. Waiter defends deaf son against arrogant billionaire. Single dad loses job standing up for what's right. This is what courage looks like. The view count climbed as Daniel watched. 3 million from 1,000,005. The comment section scrolled endlessly. Some people called him a hero. Others said he'd overstepped. A few accused him of staging it for attention, but the overwhelming majority seemed united in their anger toward Victoria Hartwell. She should be ashamed. Imagine treating your own child like that. Money can't buy decency. Daniel closed the laptop and pressed his hands against his face. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like the whole world was watching him through a window he couldn't close. His phone rang again. He let it go to voicemail. Then another call, another voicemail. By evening, he had 43 missed calls and over 100 text messages from numbers he didn't recognize. One message stood out. It was from a local news station. "We'd love to interview you. Your story is inspiring millions. Please call us back." Daniel deleted it without responding. The next morning, someone knocked on the door. Daniel looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a business suit holding a microphone. A cameraman stood behind her, his equipment already powered on. Daniel didn't open the door. He waited until they left, then closed the blinds and made sure Emma stayed away from the windows. By the third day, the video had reached 10 million views. Daniel stopped checking. He unplugged the TV and turned off his laptop. He focused on Emma, on keeping her routine normal, on pretending the world outside wasn't imploding. Then his landlord called. "I saw the video," Mr. Kowalski said. His voice was gruff, but not unkind. "Hell of a thing you did." Daniel didn't respond. He waited for the other shoe to drop. "I'm still going to need the rent," Mr. Kowalski continued. "But I'll give you an extra 2 weeks. That's the best I can do." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Thank you?" 2 weeks. It wasn't much, but it was something. The money didn't come from where he expected. 4 days after the video went viral, Daniel received an email. The subject line read, "For the father who stood up for us." Inside was a link to a crowdfunding page. Daniel stared at the screen, his hands trembling as he clicked through. Someone had started a fund in his name for Emma's medical bills, for rent, for the life he was struggling to hold together. The page had been up for less than 48 hours, and it had already raised $37,000. Daniel scrolled through the donations. $5, $20, $50, $100. Each one came with a message. "Thank you for showing my son that his voice matters. My daughter is deaf. This made me cry. You stood up when no one else would. Let us stand up for you. I was a single parent once. I know how hard it is. You're not alone." Daniel read every comment. Every single one. He sat at the kitchen table with tears streaming down his face, unable to process the kindness of strangers who owed him nothing. Emma walked in and saw him crying. She climbed into his lap and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "Don't be sad." Daniel held her tight and tried to find his voice. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," he said. "I'm just really, really grateful." By the end of the week, the fund had passed $200,000. Daniel sat in the apartment staring at the number on the screen, unable to believe it was real. It was more money than he'd seen in his entire life. Enough to pay off Emma's medical bills, enough to cover rent for 2 years, enough to breathe. He called the hospital the next morning. His hands shook as he dialed. "St. at Mary's Hospital. How can I help you?" Daniel cleared his throat. "I'd like to schedule a surgery for my daughter, Emma Collins." The scheduler pulled up her file. "Let me see. Yes, Dr. Rivera recommended a valve repair surgery. We've had it listed as elective due to financial constraints." Daniel closed his eyes. "It's not elective anymore. I can pay for it." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then the scheduler's voice softened. "We can get you in next month," she said. "Would that work?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Next month is perfect." He hung up and sat in the silence of the apartment. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe without the weight of impossible choices crushing his chest. The offers came next. 3 different restaurants reached out offering him jobs, better pay, better hours. One even offered health insurance. Daniel read through each email carefully, then accepted the position at a place called the Harbor House. It was smaller than the Golden Palm, quieter, and it was only 6 blocks from Emma's school. He started the following Monday. The manager, a woman named Claire, greeted him with a warm handshake and a genuine smile. "We're glad to have you," Claire said. "What you did took guts. We need more people like that in this industry." Daniel didn't know what to say. He just nodded and got to work. But the message that mattered most came a week and a half after the video went viral. It was a text from an unknown number. "Can we meet? You reminded me that my voice matters. Ethan." Daniel stared at the message for a long time. His chest felt tight. He thought about Ethan standing up in that restaurant, about the way the young man had finally spoken after years of silence. Daniel typed back slowly. "Of course. When and where?" Ethan suggested a coffee shop on the edge of downtown, a quiet place called Brood Awakening, tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. Daniel arrived 15 minutes early and sat by the window watching the street. His palms were sweating. He didn't know what to expect. Didn't know what to say. Ethan walked in 10 minutes later. He looked different than he had at the restaurant. Lighter. His shoulders were straighter. His expression softer. He spotted Daniel and walked over, his movements careful but deliberate. Daniel stood and extended his hand. Ethan shook it, his grip firm, then sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel ordered them both coffee. Black for him, latte for Ethan. They waited in silence until the drinks arrived. Ethan broke the silence first. His voice was quiet but steady. "I've been wanting to thank you," he said. Daniel shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. Ethan smiled faintly. Yes, I do. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a notebook, leather-bound, well-worn. He flipped it open and turned it toward Daniel. Inside were pages of handwriting, neat, careful. Ethan pointed to the top of the first page. I started writing after that night, Ethan said. Things I've wanted to say for years, but never could. Daniel scanned the page. The words were raw and honest, painful, beautiful. My mom always treated my deafness like a flaw, Ethan continued. Like something that needed to be fixed or hidden. I spent so long trying to be invisible that I forgot I had a voice at all. Daniel looked up at him. And now Ethan's smile grew. Now I'm remembering. They talked for over an hour. Ethan told him about growing up in a world that expected him to adapt but never met him halfway. About the isolation, the loneliness, the feeling that he was always a burden to the people who were supposed to love him. I learned sign language when I was 5, Ethan said. But my mom refused to learn it. She said it would make me dependent, that I needed to live in the hearing world. Daniel felt anger flare in his chest. That's not fair. Ethan shrugged. I know, but I didn't realize it until you said something. Until someone finally told her she was wrong. Daniel told him about Emma, about the hospital bills and the eviction notice, and the fear that he wasn't enough, that he'd never be enough. I keep thinking I'm failing her, Daniel admitted. That I should be able to do more. Be more. Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. You're wrong, Ethan said simply. You're more than enough. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized he'd been holding on to. What about your mom? Daniel asked carefully. Ethan's expression darkened slightly, but he didn't look away. She's been calling, Ethan said, leaving messages, apologizing. I haven't answered yet. Daniel nodded. He didn't push. It wasn't his place. I moved out, Ethan continued. Got my own apartment. It's small, but it's mine. I'm paying for it with money I saved from a trust fund my grandfather left me. My mom controlled it before, but I turned 21 last month. Daniel smiled. That's good. That's really good. Ethan looked down at his notebook, then back up at Daniel. I'm enrolling in community college next semester, he said. Graphic design. I've always wanted to try it, but my mom said it wasn't practical. She wanted me to study business, take over the company someday. Daniel reached across the table and clasped Ethan's shoulder. You're going to be great, Daniel said. Ethan's eyes glistened, but he smiled. So are you. They finished their coffee and stood to leave. As they walked toward the door, Ethan stopped and turned to Daniel. Can I meet her? Ethan asked. Your daughter Emma? Daniel's heart swelled. I'd like that. They met the following Saturday at the park near Daniel's apartment. The weather was clear. The sky a brilliant blue. Emma was nervous at first, clutching Daniel's hand as Ethan approached. But when Ethan knelt down and signed hello to her, she lit up. You know sign language? Emma asked, her voice full of wonder. Ethan grinned and signed back. Emma watched his hands carefully, her eyes wide with fascination. What did you say? She asked. Ethan spoke slowly so she could understand. I said, it's nice to meet you. Emma beamed. Can you teach me? Ethan looked up at Daniel, who nodded. For the next hour, Ethan taught Emma basic signs. Her name, his name. Thank you. Friend. She was a fast learner, her small hands moving with determination. When she finally got friend right, she squealed with delight and threw her arms around Ethan. Ethan looked up at Daniel, his expression soft. She's amazing, Ethan said. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. Yeah, she is. As the sun began to set, they walked back toward the apartment. Emma ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the park. Daniel and Ethan followed behind, walking in comfortable silence. You taught me something that night, Ethan said after a while. Daniel glanced at him. What's that? Ethan met his eyes. That silence isn't peace. It's fear. Daniel thought about that, about all the years he'd stayed quiet. About all the times he'd swallowed his anger and his pain because he thought it was the only way to survive. And you taught me something too, Daniel said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What? Daniel smiled. That courage can be heard even without sound. They reached the apartment building and Ethan said goodbye. Before he left, he handed Daniel a folded piece of paper. Open it later, Ethan said. Daniel waited until Emma was asleep that night before unfolding the paper. Inside was a drawing, simple but beautiful. It showed 3 figures, a man, a young girl, and a young man standing together under a tree. Beneath the image, Ethan had written a single sentence. Thank you for teaching me that I matter. Daniel set the drawing on the dresser beside the eviction notice, the one he no longer needed. He stared at both for a long time, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He'd lost his job. He'd been humiliated. He'd been terrified. But he'd also stood up. He'd spoken. He'd shown his daughter and a stranger's son. That silence wasn't the answer. And maybe that was enough. Daniel climbed into bed and closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he slept soundly. The next morning, Emma woke him up early, her face bright with excitement. Daddy, can Ethan teach me more signs today? She asked. Daniel smiled and pulled her into a hug. Yeah, sweetheart, he said. I think he'd like that. And as the morning light spilled through the window, Daniel realized something. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. Months later, Emma's surgery was successful. Daniel stood beside her hospital bed as she woke up, groggy but smiling. Ethan came to visit that afternoon, bringing flowers and a new notebook for Emma to practice her signs. The 3 of them sat together in the hospital room, laughing and signing and simply being present for one another. Outside, the world continued to turn. But inside that room, something had shifted. Something important. Sometimes one father's courage can silence the world's arrogance. And sometimes in standing up for others, we find the strength to stand up for ourselves.